Listen up.
Heat wave sweeping across Europe, scorching temperatures shattering records in several countries, including France, where the heat poses a new threat to the fire-damaged Notre Dame Cathedral. NBC's Bill Neely is in London.
It's the hottest since the Eiffel Tower was built, or since anything in Paris was built. Over 108 degrees, roasting American tourists.
It is ridiculously hot. We got to play in the fountain. This was amazing.
So hot, architects fear the roof of Notre Dame Cathedral, damaged by fire, could collapse. In Belgium, it's the hottest since 1883. In the Netherlands and Germany, more records smashed. In Britain, 100 degrees in July for the first time. And Europe may just have to get used to it. Recently, it's had the 5 hottest days in the last 500 years. In Portugal, wildfires are raging. In France, fears of a repeat of the 15,000 heatwave deaths a decade ago. Air conditioning not big in Europe. It's famous chocolate, no match for the heat. Relief, though, and rain is in sight. The warnings now for wild storms and flash floods. Lester?
All right, Bill Neely, thank you. In this country, Alaska has warmed twice as fast as the rest of the world in the last 50 years, and now parts of Alaska are feeling the heat this summer as new records are being set in the southern part of the state. Kevin Tibbles went to Alaska to see the effects firsthand.
Alaska's blue-white giants are dying, falling to rising temperatures in the 49th state.
34-degree water, recently melted ice and snow.
Matt Sundy guides tours on the massive Spencer Glacier.
So in 2009, we used to be able to step onto the ice from the end of the trail.
We're in. Today we have to kayak to the glacier's face a mile away, nimbly making our way past icebergs that have broken off.
Perhaps as recently as 30 years ago, where we're kayaking right now, would have been under hundreds of feet of ice.
Climatologist Brian Brettschneider has come to see the damage firsthand to an ice mass that's thousands of years old.
This is the warmest month on record, any month, any year for this region.
On July 4th, Anchorage set a new record at 90 degrees. Forest fires leave a haze that hangs in the air. Fisheries, a $6 billion industry, are jeopardized, and the ice keeps melting. A helicopter is now the only way to reach the top. They say the Spencer recedes 100 feet a year.
This is a phenomenal place of natural beauty. The tragedy is it's disappearing before our very eyes.
Matt Sundy's tour business, Ascending Path, is also receding.
I love the aesthetic of what meltwater creates, but the cause of it is heartbreaking.
With more carbon in the atmosphere, it's getting hotter and melting glaciers, causing water levels worldwide to rise.
In many other places, you can't see those changes, but they're occurring. Climate change is affecting everybody.
The glacier is a bit like a canary in a coal mine.
Monuments from the Ice Age now in retreat. Kevin Tibbles, NBC News in the Chugach National Forest, Alaska.
Still ahead tonight,
I can only tell you what God has showed me in the severity of atmospheric global warming changes, which is this. Over here in America, I can't talk about other places because I've never visited other places. They used to have this round type looking familiarized crystal ball that was full of liquid, and it had just a little bit of air in the top of it. If it sits there for a long period of time, the air bubble on top is whole in and of itself. But if you pick up the bubble and shake it, all of a sudden now you've got a bunch of little bubbles that used to be one big bubble. I'm trying to use an analogy here towards just exactly what's going on with our atmospheric conditions. There's pockets that used to be one humongous pocket of nothing but cold air that surrounded all that ice. Now, because it has become so hot it is displacing that big bubble of cold and turning it into little bitty pieces of cold. As the little bitty pieces of cold sometimes trickle down this way, like within the past 2 or 3 days, up until the week before last, whenever it was so humid, but up until just the past couple of days, we have had abnormal, unusual, cool weather here at this particular area in the United States. I think pretty much so all of the United States has received somewhat of a cool down just within the past 2 or 3 days. Ordinarily, this time of year, we're hitting temperatures of 92, 94, 96, sometimes even almost 100 degrees. I know that in 1979, whenever I fell off a 4-story building, it was August the 11th that registered 106 degrees outside. That was the actual temperature. That wasn't actually how it felt, because the heat was that intense. Now we're seeing heat that is being diverted in other parts of the country, like over in Europe and places over where the big tower is and stuff. But we're also seeing areas that used to be familiar with cold, such as Alaska, having areas now of warmth. Why is this? Because the cold big bubble is shrinking. As the cold big bubble is shrinking, it's also losing its volume towards its independence. As it's losing its volume of independence, the hot air is taking the cold air over. It's similar towards how the mighty Mississippi for the past 5 months has been running wild, basically either at its banks or past its banks for the past 4.5 months. The mighty Mississippi is just now starting to recede in this area to start to normalize itself. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, they said that probably within the next week it would actually get below flood stage for the first time here in this area for the past 4.5 months. That the Mississippi has never been this high for this length of time. You keep in mind, what does the Mississippi unload into? It unloads into the Gulf. As the waters pertaining to the oceans, pertaining to the seas, are increasing as far as the depth, it also increases the magnitude towards the volume that the Mississippi has to run up and resist against. And it's almost like every millimeter that the Gulf rises intensifies the pressure to the point that it literally slows the Mississippi down to the point that the water is not flowing near as quickly into the Gulf. Now, scientists won't tell you this, because they'll say, oh, there's no way for you to be able to prove your theories involving water versus masses of heat versus cold. But I think that if you look at it in a logical form, the analogies that I'm using is in fact signs that we should be seeing right in front of our eyes, but for some strange reason we still have a bunch of deniers out there that's saying that this isn't so. I don't know what it's going to take to alarm the Americans and the rest of the world that we have reached a crucial part of history that historians 25, 50, 100 years from now are going to look at us in our generation and say, how come they didn't see this coming? How come they didn't do more to divert this from happening? How come they let this come upon to this planet? It's kind of like the sleeping giant. You don't actually see the giant as long as the giant's laying down sleeping. But whenever the giant rises up is whenever you realize, my God, this is a giant. Well, as long as he was a sleeping giant, you didn't realize that he was that big because he was laying down. I'm afraid, and listen to me carefully, pertaining to the global warming issues. I am afraid that as long as we have leadership here in this country that does not know the difference between normal and abnormal in regard to the melting of the glaciers, in regard to the extra emissions that we're putting off into the atmosphere, in regard to the natural elements that we are steadily draining from the earth that was put there for a reason, and that reason wasn't for you and I to be able to ride around, put our sunglasses on, and act like that we was the coolest thing in town because we had a nice, pretty automobile to drive. But those elements was put there so that it would help to eliminate the friction pertaining to the plates that are steadily bashing against each other and moving against each other, because the planet is like a living entity. It's constantly evolving, breathing, distracting, instructing. It's almost like a living jigsaw puzzle that is constantly in motion 24/7. And of course, whenever you look at the oceans, the seas, how that the tides come in and the tides go out, you know, they put all this into the equation pertaining to the moon, which the moon is part of it. Don't get me wrong, the moon is part of it, but it's also the wobbling of the earth that causes those tides to go in at a certain time and then come back out at a certain time. The industry over in Alaska that it said was what? A multi-billion-dollar industry is now at stake because of the atmospheric environmental changes that we are steadily putting up onto the planet Earth that are causing excess heat in areas that we have never ever recorded before in the history of this planet. Please do not ignore the differences between abnormal and normal. Please, we are at a juncture in history that could possibly be the existence or the non-existence for future generations to come of those who are not going to be able to live a normal life upon this planet such as you and I are accustomed to. We are bringing abnormal conditions up into these areas that are exceeding the limitations towards what the human body can actually be a part of and can withstand. In other words, if we don't watch, we will eventually cause the generations below us in a toxic environment to the point that it will be uninhabitable for other generations to live out on normal life such as you and I have been accustomed to. So if there's ever been any type of whistle and bell going off in regard to this abnormality in the exchange of seeing some of the greatest glaciers in the world dissipate and evaporate right in front of our eyes, I feel like that it's now. It is today. Because if we don't, the future for this planet will come to an abrupt halt. And that is not what the Creator intended for us to do as far as good stewards up onto this planet. We must alternate to other means of energy other than gas, coal, etc., etc., etc. Please, for your children's sake, for your grandchildren's sake, and for their children's sake, let's not ignore the signs. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you to my viewers. Thank you. And good luck to all of us. You know, we can make jokes out of this. We can create costume characters and fictitious crazy looking different things, but the fact of the matter is the genesis to the very design of this earth is at stake here. The very genesis of in the beginning, according to the Holy Bible, according to the Book of Life, whenever God created Adam and then created Eve from Adam's ribcage, is at stake here. Please, let's quit ignoring the signs. Thank you.